Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second iteration of a very timely topic. So actually, in some ways, it clarifies the picture even more. You're all following the debate in Washington and elsewhere about how much of the Iranian nuclear program was obliterated. But we also think that a more important question, and I'm sure our speaker will relate to it, is not what happened in the past, but what will happen in the future, and what needs to be done to make sure that Iran is contained, and that both the nuclear, the ballistic, and the terror networks are limited and eliminated over time, and that is up to the diplomats and diplomacy, backed by the power of a future military strike if necessary. And now that is much more concrete to all sides. And here, it's very clear that the United States will be a leader together with Israel, but also Europe. It's not going to be anyone else. It's not going to be any other region in the world, and it's going to be the main powers in Europe that will work together with Israel and the United States to make sure that over time, the Iranian nuclear program is fully limited, if not destroyed. And this is where ELNET will be focused. So we urge our supporters to pay attention to the importance of Europe in the eyes of Israel and Israel's national security. And we need your support, financial, and in terms of understanding the importance of the mission of this organization, which is the leading pro-Israel network in Europe. The Europeans, the Italians, the Germans, the French, the British will be, and NATO will be playing, and EU itself will be playing a significant role in the days, months, and years ahead. And this is where we need to invest. So without further ado, Pascaline, the director of ELNET's Forum of Strategic Dialogue, the floor is yours to introduce our speaker again. Thank you.
Thank you once again, David, and welcome again. Since Monday, a lot of things happened since we spoke last. We've had Iranian attack on the US bases, and now we have a ceasefire. So now we can talk to you from Israel slightly more relaxed and having slept 2 nights, which was definitely welcome. So back with us again is Dr. Meir Javedanfar. Again, I have the pleasure to introduce you. Meir is an Iranian-Israeli lecturer, author, and commentator, and he has been teaching Iranian politics at Reichman University in Israel since 2012. We've also asked him to write a short article, which is ready now. So we will be posting the link in the chat box. It's called Iran at a Historic Juncture. So very timely. And I invite you all to read it, maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow after the call. And now we will focus on having an actual discussion. So maybe let's start, Meir, like last time, because again, I think we should start with a small update since we spoke on Monday, because a lot happened. So maybe take us through what happened, what's happening on Iranian side, and how they've been reacting to the developments.
Sure. Thank you for having me. People are returning to Tehran. The roads outside of Tehran from June 13th onwards were clogged with people leaving the city. There was a lot of concern. People were concerned that Israel is going to blow up Tehran indiscriminately like Saddam Hussein did during the Iran-Iraq war. Some other people, the new generation of Iranians, have never experienced war. They were very concerned. This is something that they had never dealt with. So they decided to leave. Some other Iranians left because their family abroad was in a bigger panic than them. So they kept calling them saying, why are you staying in Tehran? Why are you staying in Tehran? Tehran is getting bombed. And so they left. I can't give you the exact numbers that how many left. People say millions, some people say 2 million, some people say 5 million. For the sake of my credibility and accuracy, I don't know which number is exactly true for me to quote you, but there were millions who left Tehran. This created, for example, petrol was rationed. Some people were queuing to buy some of the foodstuffs because of, again, to us, I mean, I was 14 when we left. What people remember from war is Tehran being bombarded and people having to queue to buy sometimes milk, to buy sometimes cheese, things like that. So apparently there was some queuing for some essential stuff, but what worried Iranians most was when this war was going to, when it was going to end, if they were going to get killed, and if there was somebody from the regime living near them that they didn't know. For example, in my neighborhood of Kisha in Tehran, something like 15 minutes from our apartment, my dad's pharmacy, an Israeli drone flew into someone's window, and it turned out that that person, the person near that window or who owned that window, was a senior Iranian nuclear scientist. So people, you know, there's that concern. There's a lot of anxiety because during the war, some of the production of some of the essential foodstuff and essential services was suspended. And when things are suspended, there's less production. And when there's less production, prices go up. And Iran was already grappling with inflation of something like 40%, 50% for food. So some of the prices of foodstuff has gone up. But it's just general anxiety. People are already anxious before this conflict, and they're even more anxious afterwards. I understand there's a lot of anger. There's always been anger among Iranians against the regime. I think it has increased even more. I don't see any signs of protests yet, but the anger is there. Some people are angry at Israel. They say, you know, we don't want this war. We don't want this regime, but we don't want our country to be attacked. But I think the level of people who are angry at Israel for this war, it cannot be compared to the people who are angry at the regime for this war. You know, some people could hate the regime, but nobody likes their country being attacked by anybody. So there was this reaction by some Iranians against Israel. The biggest question is right now, where is Mr. Khamenei? Huge question. He issued a statement today talking about victory, etc., etc. Did he make it before? It's just the fact that he's not there. I'm not going to make assumptions about if he's dead or if he's alive. You know, I don't know, to be honest with you. We have to wait and see. But the regime has to grapple with a lot of difficult choices in the coming months, especially, and we can talk about those during our conversation.
If you look at what happened, how would you summarize the damage done to the regime? And would you say our title, you know, Iran, is it on the brink? Was it on the brink, or are we not there yet?
Brink of regime change?
Brink of, let's say, a change in their behavior, perhaps more than a brink of regime change. But yeah, both.
Regime change is not there, but it's too early. You know, it's like predicting an earthquake. And Iran, unfortunately, actually happens to be already an earthquake-prone country. Many Iranians have died, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands have died in the last century because of earthquake, because its geography is very earthquake-prone. And now, because of its politics or politics of the regime, it's very politically earthquake-prone. Politically, it's very earthquake-prone. You know, Khamenei faces two very difficult choices after this war. First and foremost, I'm sure there are people within the regime who, behind the bombast, they saying we won. They know how badly they did. They are aware of the fact that Israel simultaneously knew, like, you know, the Big Brother show, like a camera in each room, all 20 places across Tehran, where each one of the senior members of the security services or the military hierarchy or nuclear scientists were, and they were attacked simultaneously, I think, at some stage, at least like 4 or 5 targets simultaneously. But in a single night, they lost 20 members of their echelon. Most of the people were sleeping in their beds when they were killed. A missile entered the room while they were sleeping. Sometimes you see the missile entering the window and leaving the wall, across the wall. Unfortunately, if the person's partner or girlfriend or temporary girlfriend was sleeping next to the official, then they were also unfortunately killed also. But I don't believe the regime numbers of civilians killed, and if there were any civilians killed, unfortunately it wasn't intentional. We were not intentionally targeting civilians. I think if one day you will see the actual number of bombs and missiles that were fired at Iran, and you compare that to even the regime's number of civilians killed, you will see that the numbers was very, very low. We want the people of Iran on our side. This is what part of our strategy. Killing them on purpose completely contradicts that. But Khamenei has 2 very difficult choices, which is what will make Iran politically earthquake prone. Number 1 is to continue like 12th of June, same policies the day before the war erupted, confrontational, keeping key positions between the regime elite, just continue with the status quo. Okay, if you do that, then you now have an extremely angry population who will now have to, on top of having suffered war, which many of them blame the regime, will now have to face even higher inflation, even higher blackouts. The electricity shortages, electricity stoppages in Iran make people foam at the mouth. I really don't know if there is a word strong enough in the English dictionary to describe the anger people feel in Iran when there's electricity shortages. Not only because they live in a country which has the world's 2nd biggest gas reserves and the 4th biggest oil reserves. They look at Mr. Trump going to Saudi Arabia, who did not have an industrial base until recently, and signing an AI deal for $400 billion. The Saudis have electricity. Iran, which has had an industrial base since 1970, can't produce it. So if he doesn't make changes, then it's going to that's going to be a force multiplier in the anger of the people and in the impact. If he does change, he has the opportunity. Impossible is nothing. It is possible that he will consider a new approach towards the West. I'm not saying, embassy in Tel Aviv, but toning down the rhetoric against Israel, ending support for terror organizations, having better relations with the West. That's another option. And that's an option he has to seriously consider after the damages his regime suffered. An Iranian president, there are people in Iran who are calling for this. They are saying, look, during this war, the people of Iran sided with the leaders and acted in a patriotic way. They did not protest. They did not overthrow the regime as the regime says Netanyahu wanted. So we must listen to the people of Iran. But that also carries a lot of risks for Khamenei, listening to his own people. Listening to his own people carries a lot of risks. Number 1, he could lose the core nucleus of his supporters. They thrive on Iran being isolated because that allows them to have complete monopoly over different sectors of Iranian society. Okay? You improve relations with the West, you bring Western products, between products of the regime companies and products of Western companies, it's not even a question which one the people of Iran are going to choose. Okay? So that is going to severely undermine the economic interest of the people who stood by him, who protected him during this war. And that could cause instability within his regime. And also the people of Iran, the regime is right. The regime is right. If you give people of Iran a little bit of freedom, they will want more. And it's their right to want more. Okay, and so the regime is worried that if it opens the window a little bit, suddenly there will be a flood of demands for more freedom, which the people of Iran deserve. So that could also destabilize the regime. So there are many difficult choices to be made. I will end by stating that Khamenei is not a young man. He's 86 years old. And this is a lot of questions to consider for somebody who has just been through such a war and his age.
And maybe just to finalize on this point, I mean, you have been following him and the regime for years. Like, how would you rate the chances for one way or the other? More chance that it will just embolden him, or more chance that this will actually make a change?
Judging by Khomeini and the way he behaved towards Saddam, he could have ended the war 6 years before it ended in 88. Judging by Khamenei, these people don't like to make changes. It's very difficult for them to make hard decisions that could destabilize their base and could also go against their own ideology, but for practical reasons also, because of economic interest and political interest. Based on the previous behavior of Khamenei, I think he's going to continue with the June 12th policies mostly. I would be very surprised if there's going to be a change. I think if there's going to be a change, then that's going to be brought about by his successor. And I think it's very important for your viewers and everybody in ELNET to know that the list of potential successors of Khamenei is one of the most classified issues in Iran. It's top classified information. So if you hear anybody saying it's going to be his son, it's going to be Ayatollah X, Y, and Z, I don't know any credible base that these claims are made from. Nothing. It's all hints and allegations, people just connecting things. So we don't know, and that could be a reason why Israel didn't overthrow the regime, perhaps even the Mossad doesn't know who's on that list.
Now, talking about regime change, I understand this is not something that will happen overnight. And if we're just thinking about this on a longer term, and taking into account that Iran is a huge country, 75 the size of Israel, 75 times the size of Israel,
80 times.
80 times. You're the expert. What needs to actually happen for regime change to even have a chance to occur? And maybe can you elaborate on the differences between the IRGC and the army and their loyalties, if there are any differences?
In Iran, and for your viewer, for friends who are on this call, the regime has a state within a state to protect itself. So the regime has got an armed forces, has got its own economic networks, it's got an economy within Iran's economy. The regime has its own economy with its own conglomerates. It's got its own armed forces called the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You don't see the word Iran there. Islamic Revolutionary. So their job is to protect the revolution. And the regime has a state, political system within Iran's political system, like it's also whereby checks the government's decisions and the parliament's decisions through institutions such as the Guardian Council, and it checks who runs for president and all the candidates. I think for now the regime has control over all of these, and the army, which is the state the country's official armed forces, Artesh, is checked by the IRGC. Some people think there's rivalry between them. Yeah, maybe over budget, but there's no chance of like the army, which is the country's armed forces, rising up against the IRGC, at least not from what we see, because the regime really vets who's the head of the army as well. And they sometimes send people from the army from the IRGC to serve in the army. There's all these checks and balances. I don't think there's a real chance of the army rising up at this point. What I can tell you, and this has been verified from an article that was on an Iranian website, and it was removed very soon afterwards, which goes to show how much it was even more true. There was insubordination among the ranks of the armed forces. There was insubordination. Some officers and some soldiers did not turn up to the bases, did not carry out the orders. Was it because they thought it's suicide to fight Israel? Was it because somebody called them from Tel Aviv and threatened them? There were calls from Tel Aviv, by the way, threatening. I don't know if you saw those clips in the Washington Post. The Aman, the Israeli military intelligence, provided the clips of somebody calling in Farsi, threatening senior officers. I don't know, but there was insubordination. In terms of the regime, what needs to happen to be overthrown, you need to have, and I think there's a study done that you need like 3.5% of the population turning up to protest. That's more than 1 million, like continuously. That needs to happen. It hasn't happened yet.
And in terms of the size and the way they're armed, how does IRGC compare to the regular army?
Oh, the IRGC is smaller, but it gets, I think, twice as much the budget because its job is to protect the revolution. I would advise the government of Israel and all of Israel's supporters not to rely on the possibility of regime change in Iran as a pillar of our security. It's too unpredictable, too unstable. We can hope for it. Yes, it's a hope, but it's not a policy. Hope is not a policy. We all wish to see this terrible regime gone, but there are many things outside of our control when it comes to regime change in Iran. One of them being the people of Iran actually wanting to risk life and limb. And there are many people in Iran who are terrified of this regime, and with good reason. The regime does things to torture Iranians that I cannot say what they do on this call. People are scared. People are trying to live life day by day. There's a lot of problems of anxiety in Iran, problems of depression, and I can completely understand it living in a country like this. So I would say we have to rely on other pillars of security and defense against the Iranian regime. One of them being observation of what's happening inside Iran, intelligence-wise, and being always ready to strike if the regime wants to dash for a bomb. And also cooperation with the United States is very important. And we also have to strengthen our relations with our European allies, who I was very happy to see that they stood with us during this war. And I also think that to strengthen ourselves and to strengthen Israeli society and to strengthen the IDF, we need to end the war in Gaza. This war needs to end. Because that would strengthen our diplomatic position in the region, and it would also give the IDF a rest because it's been too long. And the death toll, it's just too much to bear. Israeli society, we really need to start to recover from October 7th, and that recovery would strengthen us against the Iranian regime. I actually think, sorry, just one point. I think what is happening in Gaza it is making the Iranian regime very happy. They see the number of Israeli soldiers being killed, no exit strategy. I really think we need to change that policy.
Can you elaborate a little bit about Europe's reaction to the war? And maybe looking forward, do you think they have any role to play in potential negotiations between the US and Iran moving forward? What kind of leverage do they have?
Well, in the Iran nuclear deal, there is a mechanism that says if Iran is not living up to its obligations, the Europeans have until October 2015 to ask the United Nations to reimpose all of the sanctions against Iran. And Iran, although the United States left the deal, and I think that was a terrible mistake, the Europeans are still in the deal, and they have a right to demand Iran to cooperate. Why was there a site in Torghozabad that there are traces of enriched uranium found there? And Iran is not answering a whole host of questions. And the Europeans are going to use that as leverage to get Iran to cooperate. And if they don't, there's going to be all of these sanctions are going to be reimposed. And I think the Europeans could use that leverage, the threat of the trigger mechanism, to force Iran to sign to sign President Trump's nuclear agreement. And that would be tremendous contribution to our security and to the security of the region. Because it calls for the complete eradication of Iran's enrichment program.
I would like now to open the floor for questions, Q&A with the participants. I see there are a lot of questions already. But before we move to the second part, I want to give the floor to Sia, my colleague in the US.
Thank you, Pascaline. And I want to thank Meir for this very nuanced and cutting-edge analysis. We're very fortunate to have you as a partner.
Thank you, sir.
For ELNET, and you provide us with a lot of important insights into a country which is in many ways still a riddle, even to those of us who speak Persian and were born in Iran, of which there are many of us among ELNET supporters in Los Angeles, where I'm at. And so really appreciate this eye-opening briefing. And I just want to quickly thank our supporters on the call who've been with us this year with our campaign, some of whom have been with us since the very beginning of this organization. And we obviously cannot do what we do without their support. And we're almost at the halfway mark of the year, but the majority of our campaign is still in front of us. So we need our friends and longtime supporters to step up to the plate. Being educated, being on these briefings is very important for supporters, for staff members, and for our constituency in many ways, which are the policymakers and decision makers in Europe. But that's only the beginning. We need to take action. We need to take delegations to Israel. We need to do on-the-ground advocacy in European capitals. We need to make these strategic dialogues happen. And as Meir noted, and as my colleagues noted before, the Europeans are going to play a pivotal role when it comes to the threat of snapback sanctions, when it comes to holding Iran accountable for violating the JCPOA. And they hold some levers of economic pressure over Iran that the US has already given up. So ELNET's work is more important than ever. We're going to share the donation link in the chat box. And thank you again, everyone, for your support, past, present, and future. And Pascaline, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, we have quite some questions from David Siegel, president of ELNET US, which I will pass along to you. First question, how is Iran seen now by the Gulf countries? Is it less of a threat? What effect will the war have on the potential to expand the Abraham Accords?
Yes, it is seen as a less of a threat. I think a lot of these Persian Gulf countries are quite happy to see the Iranian regime weakened. I think they are quite happy, and I think there is a potential for more Abraham Accords, but we need to stop the war in Gaza. that needs to happen. And but I also think we need a different government in Israel. I don't think the current government in Israel, unfortunately, is capable of reaching a new accord with Arab countries, perhaps with Syria, ironically, because the Syrians probably aren't going to deny their desire or demand the end of the war in Gaza, but the Persian Gulf countries, they demand it, from what I understand, especially Saudi Arabia. So we need that to happen. If I can just add one point, which may be unrelated directly to your question, I'm just floored by the decision of President Trump to remove sanctions against the sale of oil from Iran to China. I'm floored. I'm hoping that this is part of a grand strategy of getting Iran to sign a new nuclear agreement, because otherwise I really am lost for words why this was done at this stage. But that's the beauty of dealing with the President Trump. You don't know what's going to happen next.
Like, you read David's mind, because that was exactly the next question he had. So you've already answered that. Next question is from Tom Flesch, chair of ELNET US, president, sorry. Then how is the exit strategy for the Gaza conflict to end? And briefly, what more can ELNET do, considering Europeans are still in the agreement with Iran and the US is out? You've already partly answered that, but maybe elaborate a little bit.
The Europeans, you see, what has happened is that the Iranian regime has done enough to alienate the Europeans. You see, they keep kidnapping their citizens or dual Iranian EU citizens. Then there's all these terrorist strikes on European soil, which some of them were straight after the nuclear deal with Iran was approved. And apparently Israel helped the European security forces, for example, in Germany, to thwart them before they were carried out. As I said, there are some people in Iran who don't want good relations with the West because they don't want the business interest threatened, which is why as soon as the JCPOA went into effect, they were planning to carry out terror attacks on European soil. The Europeans do have leverage, especially until October 2015. They have a lot, 2025, sorry. They have a lot of leverage. That snapback gives them a lot of leverage that they could use. In terms of Gaza, there is an agreement for Israel to withdraw to get. I mean, there's a draft on the table for Israel to withdraw, for all the hostages to be released, and for Arab countries to send their own security, their own security forces, and also reformed members of PA to run Gaza. There is such a thing on the table, but for political considerations in Israel, it has not been accepted, and I think that's a terrible mistake.
There's a question from Marika Boros. She's a journalist from the UK. Have all IRGC officers and soldiers who were part of the insubordination still alive? I have read reports of executions of Iranians who collaborated with Israel. Are those reports confirmed? And if so, how many people were involved? And were the executions public for maximum psychological warfare effects?
The article that I read, I have to refer to what I know here. That the article stated that the authorities in the different provinces where this insubordination happened were given complete. They could act as they wish. They could act in any way that they wish to punish these people. Now, the regime, this is what happens after dictatorial regimes lose. They usually, when they are humiliated abroad, then they take it out on their own people. It's like an abusive husband and abusive father. He's a bully to his wife and his kids. And then outside the home, he tries to bully someone else, but he gets put in his place. And then feeling humiliated, he comes home and beats up his wife and kids even more. This is the same with the Iranian regime. Now it's going after people, anybody who put a like or said something pro-Israel, because people there are many people in Iran who see the regime as their biggest enemy, and they see Israel as the enemy of their biggest enemy. Therefore, they see Israel as their friend. So there were people, for example, on WhatsApp who were even private messages, written text, who were expressing happiness. And there's a lot of Chinese phones in Iran, and as you should know that it is possible to read text on your phone, especially if it's Chinese Xiaomi or something like that, even in other phones. The only thing about WhatsApp that's difficult to encrypt is if you're having a conversation. That's different. But if you have text on your screen, there are ways of getting there. And the regime is going after those people. And, the regime is in trying to settle scores with the Iranian opposition, with anybody who doesn't agree or hasn't agreed with its policies until now. So it's arresting people and executing them in order to deter. This is all deterrence. Marika, this is all deterrence. The regime wants to deter the people of Iran from uprising. Also, I think it's in a state of shock because of the penetration of the Mossad in Iran. There was even a joke that one of the missiles apparently hit the Mossad headquarters near Tel Aviv. And after the regime claimed that the building at the Mossad headquarters had been destroyed, the Mossad replied by saying, all our employees are safe as they are currently in Tehran. So nobody was hurt in this missile attack. And there's also there was another, when Fakhrizadeh, the chief nuclear scientist, was assassinated, there's a joke in Tehran that if you bumped into someone you didn't know, tell them slicha in Hebrew, because there's a good chance that there's a... So the regime is in a state of shock. So it's going around executing people. But overall, I would say the biggest reason is to deter the people of Iran from doing any uprising, because the regime is very concerned about that. And this is why we see all these executions, which is really terrible.
A question from Barry Mogul. When and how does Israel and the US determine a correct, reliable assessment of damage to Iran?
First and foremost, the United States, as much as proud as we are of our security services of Mossad and Aman, our resources cannot be compared to the resources of the United States. First of all, America has brilliant people. The people in the US intelligence community are incredibly talented, and they have some of the most incredible technology. And so Israel and they're doing a great job of doing damage assessments and observations of what's happening in Iran. So does Israel. And I think this is the best way we can just keep in touch and cooperate. There's all sorts of intelligence that you could use: electronic intelligence, signal intelligence, human intelligence. But you should always remember that the only person who knows everything is God, and we're not God. And we have to live with the possibility that we will miss something out. And this is a danger that we always have to live with. Remember, when you are at your highest, you are most vulnerable. So we are at a high right now. We are at an incredible high right now. And we must not lose our heads.
I was in another call a few days ago with Zohar Palti, and one of the Brits actually had this really interesting question, which is very close to what you're saying right now. He compared this war to the 6-Day War, and he said after the 6-Day War, we had the Yom Kippur War. So after Israel is full of confidence, we need to always, not to lose our overconfidence, not to be overconfident, and you don't know what's going to happen. So it's very similar to what you're saying now. It was an interesting point. I have a question from Victor Abrams from ELNET UK. He's congratulating you on the insights, and he's asking, were you surprised that the war stopped so suddenly without preconditions for Iran?
Yes, I was surprised. I was surprised and I was happy also. We have every justification to hit Iran, even just the nuclear, even the nuclear. If you just put aside the nuclear issue, we have justification. Since 1991, this regime has been killing Israelis, paying anybody who wants to kill our people. You know, it's estimated that during Oslo 1 and Oslo 2 in the 90s and early 2000s, the Iranian regime, through its proxies, killed and injured more than 1,000 Israelis. Okay? If somebody in a space of a decade had killed and injured 30,000 Americans, if Iran had sponsored the killing of 30,000 Americans in bus bombings and in cafe bombings, I think there would have been war already. And so we have enough justification to attack the Iranian regime, which is, you know, this is a war we didn't want. Believe you me, I've written about the number of times Israel bent over backwards to try to reach out to this regime, to try to find somebody who wants to talk. And there were numerous Iranian presidents who wanted to change the regime's policies regarding Israel. Yes, you heard that right. Mr. Rafsanjani, president, 1989 to 1997. In 1991, he tried to support the Madrid peace talks, saying you can do whatever you want, we'll accept it. Khamenei torpedoed him. Then you have Mr. Khatami, who wanted to reduce tensions with Israel and improve relations with the West. What did Mr. Khamenei do? Arrested 13 Jews to torpedo him. Mad old Ahmadinejad denied the Holocaust, called for the elimination of Israel. Towards the end of his first term, his right-hand man and you know, the father-in-law of his son, very powerful figure. Don't mess with Iranian father-in-laws. He said that we want to be friends with people of all world. All people. Our problem is with governments. We have no problem with people. Melat. So we want to be friends with people of every country. And somebody asked him specifically, do you mean Israel too? And he said, yes, we want including Israel. And there was a huge attack against him, and Ahmadinejad came to support him. Even mad old Ahmadinejad. Mr. Rouhani too tried. There's a very famous meeting that was reported in Radio France International. He said to IRGC officers, our biggest enemy is not Israel, it's not America. It's inflation, it's you know, the drought, environmental problems. What did they do? They torpedoed him right after the JCPOA went into effect. So this is a war that Mr. Khamenei has imposed on the state of Israel. We have no other choice. And so we had to attack, but I think it was a point where it was enough. It was enough, 12 days. And there's always this niggling feeling, uncomfortable feeling that, yes, it's right to attack the Iranian regime. Yes, it's absolutely right to destroy its missile capabilities, nuclear capabilities. But you have this niggling suspicion. Does Mr. Netanyahu want this war to continue from now until the next elections to serve his political purposes? It may not be true, but there's always that niggling, you know, concern. And I think President Trump perhaps nipped that in the bud. And I think what nipped it in the bud more than anything else was the fact that 2 days before the ceasefire, Ronen Bergman, who has many connections in the Ministry of Defense, published an article saying Israel has achieved most of its goals anyway. Israel can finish the war in the next couple of days or next week, because first of all, we have achieved all our strategic objectives, and also Israel has mastery over Iran's skies, which means that if the Iranian regime does anything untoward, then we can attack them again. And I think with that being true, I think at that point, it seems that it was the right time to end the war.
I have a question from David Siegel. Another question. What would be a good nuclear deal in your eyes? Is it realistic to believe diplomacy can contain Iran now?
I support the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Every every report of the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran was keeping the deal. Because of the JCPOA, Iran was the most inspected country in the world by the inspectors of the IAEA. The 500 kilogram worth of documents smuggled out by the Mossad from Tehran also proved that Iran was living by its nuclear agreements, not because they're nice, they didn't suddenly become, wonderful, wonderful people. No, because it served their interest to keep the deal. We made it in a way, the deal was constructed in a way, and President Obama deserves a lot of credit for this. He didn't get enough credit. It's not a perfect deal, but he gave Iran, in a way, enough incentives to keep the deal without threatening the security of the state of Israel and other countries from Iran's nuclear program, from the Iranian nuclear program. So I think if there's going to be another deal, there will have to be give and take. But as long as it gets rid of the enrichment program, especially, then we can live, then it's going to be good. I would also like to say, I don't want to be a doomsdayer that, oy vavoy, it's over, we got to run to the shelters. If there is a deal that gives Iran the right to maintain limited enrichment on its soil, as long as it limits the kilograms of enriched uranium that Iran has, 300 kilograms, it must, as long as it limits the level of enrichment, it maintains it at low levels, 3.5%. And as long as the inspections are tough, so we could live with that as long as if there is. But of course, in an ideal world, we want enrichment gone. But in life, you don't always get what you want, so you got to be ready for it.
I think you've already kind of answered the next question, but let me ask anyways. Question from Mehran Faramandopour. How do we trust the Iranian regime to actually be honest and to follow through any agreements that we enter in with them? And I think you already gave some good examples of how the previous deal was good.
First and foremost, Mehran is a beautiful name because it's my Persian name. In Iran, we all have a passport name. My parents chose my Hebrew name, Meir, named after my grandfather, late grandfather, who was a cloakroom attendant in the public bath of Isfahan. But I had a non-official Persian name. It's Mehran. Yeah. And I'm getting so sentimental. What was the question? Sorry.
How can we trust them?
Oh, you never trust, you verify.
Exactly.
You never trust. I just want to give a little bit of history here for our friends who follow Iranian history. The Shah of Iran, the biggest reason why America supported the Shah of Iran was not oil. It was not oil. And it was not, because they liked him or because they bought weapons from him. The biggest reason why America supported Iran during the Shah was that the Americans were obsessively worried about Soviet missile program, which was being tested right in the heart of Kazakhstan. And in the 50s, there was no satellites, and the U-2 plane could only fly once in a while. So to resolve all of these problems, the CIA had 3 listening stations in Iran who were monitoring the electronic intelligence emissions of this program. In 1972, when President Nixon reached the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty with the Soviets, it called for the reduction of Soviet missiles. He didn't trust the Soviets. So how could he verify that the Soviets are keeping their promise of reducing the number of missiles? This verification was so important that right after his meeting with Brezhnev, President Richard Nixon and Kissinger did not return to Washington. They went to Tehran to meet with the Shah, because those listening stations in Iran were key in US defense verification of the Soviets fulfilling their side of the bargain. And that's one of the biggest reasons why America supported Iran and the Shah. The Americans didn't trust the Soviets. They verified. We can do the same with the Iranians.
Another question here. Will Iran trust the US since they claim they were tricked by the US and Israel?
Good question.
Will Europe need to play a more central role as intermediaries as a result?
Yes, Mr. Khamenei was deeply hurt by President Trump's decision to leave the May 2018 nuclear agreement. And his sentiments and his sensitive feelings aside, I think one of the reasons, unfortunately, we are in this war is because of the decision to leave the nuclear deal in 2018, because the nuclear deal did not allow Iran to enrich uranium at 60%. And of course, the Iranian, I blame President Trump for leaving the deal, but the Iranians also share blame, because President Biden, mark my words, bent over backwards to try to get back to the nuclear deal, and it was Mr. Khamenei who didn't agree. And instead of returning to the nuclear deal, he decided to side with Russia against Ukraine, which made it even worse, the more toxic. So Mr. Khamenei can claim injury in this situation, but he also carries a lot of responsibility. And I think the way he behaved towards the United States, especially during President Biden, made it as isolated his regime even more. And I think, yes, he can say whatever he wants, but as much as it was wrong for President Trump to leave the Iran nuclear deal, Khamenei made it far, far, far worse, which is where we are today, and the Russians and the Chinese are not going to come to his rescue. President Putin is not going to risk any Russian interest to save Mr. Khamenei, nor the Chinese.
Thank you very much. There are no more questions, so I think we can end here. And thank you so much for your time with us. Plus, you already gave us at least half an hour last time, so
All right.
so don't want to take away too much of your time. And
No, I really hope. I really hope we strengthen our relations with Europe. I lived in England for 17 years. I also have British citizenship. I think, yes, there's a lot of, I'm very concerned by what I see in Europe, by some of the anti-Israel attitudes, but all is not lost. It is not even close to it. There's a lot of room, incredible amount of potential and room for improvement and cooperation between the State of Israel and the EU, which is our biggest trade partner. And I think we should, and I'm very grateful for the support of ELNET in doing so. Yes, there are people critical of Israel in Europe, but they're also unjustly critical. It's okay to be critical, but unjustly critical with Israel to the point of obsession. But we also have friends in Europe, and we should strengthen and deepen our relations with them, and it would help Europe, and it would also help the State of Israel. And I'm very grateful that there are people in Los Angeles, or as I call it quite rightly, Tehrangeles, and New York, and in Paris and London, who care enough about Israel to help us do this. And I think Pascaline and I, who live in Israel, I think your support, especially during this war, we can say, I think I can safely speak on behalf of Pascaline and all other Israelis, that during this war you stood by us since October 7th, and you stood with us, and it means a lot. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meir, and thank you so much to everyone for joining again on Thursday after our first attempt on Monday. Thank you so much for your support, your ongoing support. And next week we are reconvening back on Monday as usual. And our speaker will be Sima Shine, who's a senior expert from the INSS.
Great speaker.
Thank you. So we'll see you back on Monday. See you soon, and everyone keep safe. Thank you very much. Have a great evening or day if you're in the US.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Meir, thank you so much.
My
It was
pleasure.
so moving, and it's always good to hear your voice and your wisdom.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, let's hope